The moment that HOA slapped a fine on me for fishing, I decided to rewrite the rules of this place entirely. But before I get ahead of myself, let me tell you how it began. My name is Daniel Crowley. I am a 42-year-old widower, a father to a teenage daughter named Selena, and up until a few months ago I believed I had found a quiet refuge in a community called Brookside Estates. That belief shattered the morning I discovered a notice taped to my door. A one-page letter emblazoned with official-looking headings in black bold print announcing that I owed $500 for violating a brand-new fishing regulation. At first I thought it was some sort of joke, but the more I read, the more I realized this was dead serious. It also mentioned an amendment to our Homeowners Association guidelines. Evidently, someone had decided to ban fishing on the community lake. I had moved here only a short time prior. I chose Brookside Estates specifically because it had a lake nestled among small clusters of homes. I'm not a reckless person. I did my research before buying a property. My wife Rachel, who passed away from cancer last year, always wanted to live near water. Since we never had that chance while she was alive, I thought it would be a fitting tribute to choose a lakeside house for our new beginning. My daughter Selena and I used to fish with Rachel in her final months. It was something that brought us peace. When Rachel passed, fishing became our refuge, a way to remember her quietly, a connection to the joys we once shared. So imagine my surprise when the woman from the HOA, and I assure you it fits her personality, strolled up to us on that dock one bright Saturday and scolded me for casting a line. She acted as though I had poured toxic waste into her precious water. Karen told me I was in direct violation of an updated regulation. She said, with no lack of superiority in her tone, that fishing had just been banned to protect the aesthetics of the lake and ensure our community remains high-end. I remember glancing at Selena, who was carefully unhooking a small catfish we intended to release right back into the water. Karen informed me with that all-knowing smirk on her face that she was issuing an immediate fine of $500. I asked her where, exactly, it was written that we couldn't fish. I double-checked the original HOA documents before moving in, and none of them banned fishing back then. That's when Karen tapped her tablet screen. She showed me the brand-new clause, apparently voted in last month, presumably by a board that she controlled. Selena stood there, looking so disheartened. My daughter had been growing more withdrawn over the past year since her mother's death. Seeing her heart break that morning when the simple act of fishing was treated like a crime ignited a spark in me. I might have swallowed my pride and given up the fight if it had only been about money, but it wasn't. It was about restoring normalcy for my daughter, about letting her find comfort by the waters we both loved. So I bit my tongue before saying anything truly heated. I packed up our rods and cooler, steered Selena away, and promised myself I'd look into the matter. In my mind, though, I had already labeled Karen as an antagonist in the story of our new life. I just didn't realize how far she was willing to go. That entire weekend, I pored over our HOA documents. My background is in venture capital and investments. I understand contracts, fine print, and the various ways people can manipulate a system. It had never occurred to me that an HOA might be run like a personal kingdom. The deeper I dug, the more red flags I spotted. The original community guidelines spoke of maintaining the lake for recreational use, including fishing, canoeing, and family gatherings, but a freshly inserted addendum had indeed declared a complete ban on fishing, citing environmental concerns and resident complaints. Nowhere did I find an actual majority vote from the membership at large. Later, I discovered that Karen had been the president of Brookside Estates HOA for nearly a decade. Rumor had it she consistently engineered minor amendments that chipped away at residents' freedoms. It wasn't just the lake. She had restricted the colors people could paint their shutters. She'd insisted on bizarre lawn requirements. She even tried to ban certain dog breeds. All these measures, I learned, were quietly enforced with fines and threats of legal action. Most people paid just to avoid confrontation. Monday morning, I stood at my mailbox, reading and rereading the official violation notice. Selena was still in bed, worn out from school and the emotional toll of everything. That's when I met a neighbor who turned out to be quite an unexpected ally. A retired attorney named Hal Peterson. He had a small dog on a leash. The dog sniffed my lawn while Hal offered a polite wave. I hesitated, then decided to mention the fine. The moment I said the words Karen, fishing ban, Hal's face darkened. He came closer. He dropped his voice to a near whisper. "She got you too, huh? "I'm not surprised," he said. "She's practically run out half a dozen families in the past few years, fines for everything under the sun. If you want to talk, come by my house after dinner, I'll show you some documents." I thanked him and did exactly that later in the evening. I found Hal in his study, a cozy space lined with law books and pictures from his years in practice. He had a stack of files labeled with names I recognized from the neighborhood. "All these people left?" I asked. Hal nodded. "In most cases, yes. Karen's tactics forced them out. She claims it's all for property values and community standards, but I suspect there's something more. Something about real estate deals, flipping houses, or maybe building a personal empire. I just haven't pinned it down." Over the next hour, Hal patiently walked me through the HOA's structure. I learned about the developer, Brookside Development Corporation, and how the lake itself was technically common property, but the HOA had a long-term lease from the developer that allowed them to manage it. According to Hal, though, that lease was set to expire within a couple of months, and the developer, who'd apparently run into financial troubles, might be looking to offload assets fast. Hal suspected Karen had an inside track to purchase the lake herself, but none of this was confirmed. I felt that old familiar flicker in my chest, the same spark I'd felt when analyzing a distressed tech startup that needed capital. If the developer was eager to sell, maybe there was an opportunity. But I was getting ahead of myself. The immediate concern was that I'd been fined $500 for taking my daughter fishing. The next day, I tried the official route first. I emailed the HOA board to request a hearing or an appeal. I received a reply, ostensibly from Karen, but signed with a generic HOA Board of Directors line, stating that the board had already reviewed the matter. They concluded the fine stood, and they graciously reminded me that subsequent violations would incur steeper penalties. There was something about the tone of that message that stoked my frustration. It assumed I would just roll over and accept their version of events. I joined Selena for lunch that afternoon. She looked so glum. I asked her how she was holding up, and she merely shrugged. "I miss Mom," she whispered. "It was heartbreaking." I realized that part of her sadness stemmed from losing another piece of our life that reminded her of Rachel, our beloved fishing. If Karen and her cronies were going to steal that from us, I was determined to push back. I began investigating Brookside Development Corporation's current financial status. That's where my experience in venture capital came into play. After a bit of research, I confirmed they were indeed in dire need of fast cash. Various mortgage notes, commercial developments gone wrong, the usual story. I found hints that they had been quietly selling off pieces of land. The 6-acre lake in the middle of our community might be up for grab. But it wasn't enough to suspect. I needed hard evidence. So I discreetly reached out to some old contacts in real estate, people I'd worked with back when I was active in the investment scene. One of them, Evan Drake, was more than willing to poke around. Evan got back to me a few days later, saying, "You were right. They're absolutely looking to sell that lake, or at least transfer ownership. It's a bit complicated because it's integrated into the community, but if someone has cash on hand, they could make a deal. They'd jump at the chance to unload it." That same week, I had another run-in with Karen. I was trimming my hedges out front, and she marched right up the driveway, tablet in hand, eyes scanning for any potential violation. "Mr. Crowley," she began, "we have yet another issue. Your hedge is encroaching 2 inches past the permitted boundary. I'm afraid that's an additional $100. I just stared at her. "You're fining me because of 2 inches of hedge growth? Is that where we are now?" She pressed her lips into a thin line. "Standards are standards. Brookside Estates does not compromise on aesthetics. I expect you to rectify the issue immediately and submit payment for the violation within 30 days. Then she turned and walked away. No goodbye, no sense of reason. That's when I realized she was specifically targeting me. I suspected it might be retaliation for daring to question her fishing ban or appealing the fine. Hal had told me that was her modus operandi: harass, intimidate, and double down. Most people caved. I was not most people. My next logical step was to gather more stories. I reasoned that if I wanted to confront Karen effectively, I needed evidence she was systematically doing this to others. I started talking with neighbors. Maria, who had 3 young children, 2 of them foster kids. James, an older retiree who had lived here since the community first broke ground. Addison, a single mom struggling with 2 jobs. Their stories echoed one another. They'd been fined for minor infractions that didn't seem to apply to everyone else. Addison, for instance, was fined for having a soccer ball left in her yard overnight. Meanwhile, Karen's own relatives often scattered toys across the sidewalk with no penalty. Maria's foster kids were temporarily banned from the community pool for excessive noise, but Karen's grandkids had apparently thrown a raucous birthday party there without consequence. I also heard rumors about how Karen's real estate company was quietly buying properties whenever people sold in frustration. She allegedly had connections with a local official who helped expedite building permits or turned a blind eye when needed. This official, I learned later, was none other than a city council member whose spouse was Karen's cousin. The web of nepotism was impressive, if unethical. Selena, who was generally shy since losing her mother, noticed how heavily this weighed on me. One evening I tried to assure her that I was handling it. She eyed me skeptically, then gave me a hug and whispered, "Thanks, Dad. I hope we can still fish somehow." That simple statement reinforced my resolve. In the days that followed, Hal introduced me to a longtime resident named Dorothy Reeves. She was a retired local journalist who had an archive of old newspaper clippings, city council meeting notes, and any document that might shed light on wrongdoing around here. Dorothy was convinced that Karen had bigger plans for the lake. She pointed to a series of rezoning proposals filed at City Hall over the last few months. All of them indicated interest in subdividing part of the lake shore for private development. If Karen acquired the lake, she could do as she pleased, especially if she had allies in local government. I decided to test the waters, quite literally, with Brookside Development Corporation. I made a private inquiry through Evan, who approached the company as if representing an unnamed investor. The response was exactly what I expected. "We're in exclusive talks with a potential buyer, but we remain open to a better offer. We need immediate closing if so." The interesting part was that the buyer wasn't listed by name. I had to assume it was Karen, working through shell corporations. The more I learned, the more a strategy began to form in my mind. I had enough finances to make an all-cash offer on the lake. It was a drop in the bucket compared to some of the deals I had funded in the past. The question was, did I really want to buy a community lake, and would that make me any better than Karen? I wrestled with those questions. On one hand, I risked turning into the same kind of overlord she was, dictating terms to my neighbors. On the other hand, if the lake fell into her hands, the community would suffer. She'd likely restrict access even more, or build expensive residences that overshadowed everything else. A few weeks went by. I collected more stories of harassment. Karen had discovered that I was socializing with people she considered troublemakers. That led to further fines for me, some about a non-uniform mailbox, others about unsanctioned lawn decorations. It became almost laughable, except it was real money that they expected me to pay. One day, Selena accidentally left her bike in the driveway. Within an hour, a violation appeared on my door. It was beyond petty. I confronted Karen in front of my house one afternoon. She was outside, taking pictures of my recycling bin placement. "Is this how you spend your free time?" I asked, forcing a calm tone. "Looking for reasons to hand out tickets?" She arched an eyebrow. "I do whatever is necessary to protect Brookside Estates. Some people simply refuse to respect the rules." I decided not to argue further. You can't debate with a wall. Instead, I told her that I was going to challenge every fine. She smirked. "Be my guest, see how far that gets you." Then she pivoted on her fancy shoes and marched off. By then, I'd made up my mind. I would purchase the lake, and I would use that leverage to dismantle her stranglehold on this community. Still, I wanted to tread carefully. No sense in tipping my hand too soon. I contacted Hal, Dorothy, and a few of the neighbors who'd been fined or harassed. We held a series of discreet late-evening gatherings at Hal's house. No big group, just a few of us who wanted to see genuine change. Dorothy brought her files. Maria brought screenshots of her violation notices. Addison had pictures of her kids playing in the yard the same day she got cited for safety hazards. We compiled an organized timeline that showed Karen's pattern of selective enforcement. At the same time, I continued the process with Brookside Development Corporation. Through Evan, I put forth a cash offer above Karen's rumored figure. "We can close in 7 days, no financing contingencies," I said. That was like music to the ears of a floundering developer. We hammered out the details. A crucial one was that the HOA's existing lease on the lake was set to expire in about 2 months. Until that time, they might still claim some usage rights. But with a properly structured purchase agreement, I could have the option to terminate that lease early if the HOA was violating environmental or public safety guidelines. And from everything I'd witnessed, they absolutely were. I asked Evan to keep the buyer's identity hidden. I created an LLC, Crowley Lake Holdings, to hold the title and keep prying eyes from discovering it was me. If word gets out, I explained to the others, Karen will do everything in her power to block it. She has connections at City Hall after all. They agreed it would be best to maintain secrecy. Evan coordinated with a local environmental consultant to conduct a surface-level inspection of the lake's condition. We discovered moderate pollution from fertilizer runoff. This wasn't unusual, but it highlighted the HOA's negligence, since they were supposed to manage the water's health. If they've been ignoring these obligations, the consultant explained, it could be a basis for ending the lease. That was precisely the opening I needed. While all of this was going on, Karen called a big HOA meeting about safeguarding our community's future. She posted flyers on door depths, urging everyone to come and discuss important changes to the lake's usage. The underlying goal, I suspected, was to push for a new special assessment fee that would conveniently bankroll her acquisition plan. She probably intended to use the community's funds to buy the lake through one of her real estate companies. I showed up at that meeting, quietly taking a seat in the back. Karen stood at the front of the room with her ubiquitous tablet flanked by a few supporters, people who likely benefited from her favoritism. She welcomed everyone and introduced her plan with a flourish. We have an unprecedented opportunity to secure the lake for Brookside Estates. We must each do our part and vote to approve a temporary fee so the HOA can finalize the purchase. This will preserve our property values and maintain the community's integrity. It was a masterful piece of propaganda, I'll give her that. She made it sound as if this was purely a civic duty, ignoring the fact that she stood to gain personally if she was the developer behind the scenes. She paused, scanning the audience with a self-assured smile. When her eyes landed on me, her expression flickered, like she was amused to see that I dared to show up at all. I raised my hand to ask a question. Has the board disclosed the total amount we'll need to raise or the purchase price for the lake? Erin tilted her chin upward. We're still in negotiations, Mr. Crowley. Rest assured, we'll get the best possible deal for our community. Do we have the official vote record for banning fishing? I added, keeping my tone polite. I never received notice, and I'd like to confirm that it was done with a proper quorum. Karen's expression tightened. The board has the authority to make urgent decisions when necessary. We can't possibly consult every resident about every rule. Now, if there are no further questions... I stood up. Well, actually, I have a few more. Could you please clarify how you intend to address the existing fertilizer runoff that's polluting the lake? Doesn't the HOA have a duty to ensure water quality? She blinked, obviously unprepared for that. Some people in the crowd started murmuring. Environmental responsibility wasn't something she'd hammered on, except to claim that fishing was harmful. Now I was openly discussing real pollution. Karen forced a smile. The board is looking into that. We'll have more information soon. The tension in the room was thick. She tried to pivot back to her sales pitch for the special assessment, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted in some of the residents' minds. When the meeting adjourned, a handful of neighbors came up to me, quietly thanking me for asking questions. I could see Karen glaring at me from across the room. The next morning, I woke to find 2 brand new violation notices on my doorstep. One claimed my trash cans were left out too long. The other insisted my lawn was half an inch above the maximum permissible height. It was laughable. I felt the simmering anger in my gut, though. How dare she bully people like this? But I simply filed the notices away, waiting for the right moment. That weekend, Selena and I tried to find a different fishing spot outside the community. It wasn't the same. The drive was longer, the ambiance wasn't as serene, and my daughter looked unhappy, probably longing for the short walk down to our lake, the place that felt connected to her mom. On our way back, she finally said it. "Dad, this is stupid. Why can't we fish near home? That's literally why we moved here." I didn't have a good answer that wouldn't spark her anger further, so I just sighed and said, "We're going to fix this, I promise." The next big development arrived in my inbox a few days later. Evan wrote me excitedly, "They're accepting your offer for the lake. We can sign the purchase agreement whenever you're ready. The closing can happen within the week." My heart raced as I read that message. This was it. I would become the actual owner of the 6-acre lake that lay at the center of Brookside Estates. Ironically, the same place Karen and her allies had so relentlessly tried to guard from fishing rods. I called a discreet meeting at Hal's house that evening. He, Dorothy, Maria, and a couple of other neighbors who'd been vocal about the HOA's abuses joined. I revealed the news and their jaws practically dropped. "So you're actually buying the lake?" Maria asked, eyes wide. I nodded. "Yes, I'm forming an LLC so they won't know it's me initially, but I plan to reveal it after the closing. Once we have control, we can terminate the lease if they don't comply with environmental standards, and from everything I've gathered, they definitely don't." Hal rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You do realize Karen might try anything to stop you once she finds out. She could bring in allies at City Hall, maybe sabotage the sale. But if you already have a signed agreement and you're paying cash, that's pretty bulletproof." Dorothy chimed in. "If we can gather enough evidence that the HOA neglected the water quality, we can justify an immediate termination of their rights. Then the question becomes, what do you plan to do with the lake yourself?" I shrugged. "I'm not in this for profit. My daughter and I just wanted to fish. Everyone else who wants to enjoy it responsibly should be able to. I might restore it under a trust so the entire neighborhood has fair access, without Karen calling the shots." They all looked at me as though I'd just handed them an unexpected miracle. Maria actually teared up, whispering, "My kids would love that." I tried to keep my excitement in check. Part of me still worried that Karen would uncover this plan, but for now it felt good. Like I was stepping into the role of a guardian for the community, as odd as that might sound. 2 days later, Evan forwarded me the official purchase agreement. I signed, wired the funds, and it became real. By the end of the week, I would legally own the lake. The next move was to schedule a water quality assessment by a licensed firm, citing the HOA's obligations. I wanted official documentation that they'd been neglecting the lake's environmental needs, which would allow me to end their lease immediately. Meanwhile, Karen threw an impromptu lake preservation gala by the water's edge. She invited mostly her cronies and a few city officials. Everyone was dressed in fancy casual wear, sipping wine under a large canopy tent. She did not invite me, of course, but I got wind of it through the neighborhood grapevine. Out of curiosity, I strolled by, staying far enough back so as not to trespass on their event. I noticed one of Karen's associates collecting donations with a big glass box labeled "Save Our Lake." It was a shameless money grab. I watched her from a distance. She was in full schmooze mode, hugging well-dressed guests, laughing, assuring them that Brookside Estates was on the verge of something monumental. A local politician gave a short speech praising Karen's dedication. My teeth clenched. If only these people knew the truth, that she planned to exploit them for her own gain. But my moment of vindication came soon after the official deed for the lake was recorded in the public register. While Karen believed she was about to finalize her own deal with the developer, she had no clue that the developer had just sold it to me. That same afternoon, Evan called, exhilarated. "We're fully closed. You are now the proud owner of 6 acres of water and a 10-foot perimeter around it." My phone buzzed almost immediately after that call ended. It was an unknown number. I suspected who it might be, and sure enough, when I answered, I heard Karen's voice. "I'd like to speak to the representative of Crowley Lake Holdings," she said with a forced sweetness. Apparently she had done a quick search of the property records. "I understand you've recently acquired an asset that our community has a vested interest in." I feigned ignorance. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Her voice tensed. "Let's not play games, Mr. Crowley. I see the name on the deed, and I see your name on the LLC registration. I assume you're aware that the HOA has a binding agreement to maintain and regulate that lake. I'd be happy to negotiate a purchase from you at a fair price, assuming you haven't done anything rash yet." I felt a surge of smug satisfaction. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm quite content as the new owner. We'll be evaluating the lease agreement soon. If your HOA has met its obligations, there should be no issues." She exhaled into the phone. "I think you're making a mistake. The community has certain expectations about how that lake is managed. It's not something for personal vendettas, Mr. Crowley." I smiled. "I agree that personal vendettas shouldn't get in the way. In fact, I believe your fines for 2 inches of hedge growth might fall under that category. Anyway, if you want to talk further, Feel free to send an email. I have nothing else to discuss at the moment." That ended the call. I let out a long breath. Phase 1 was complete. The next step was to deliver my official notice to the HOA, requesting immediate remediation of the lake's pollution. I had the environmental consultant's preliminary findings showing elevated nutrient levels from mismanaged fertilizer use. Karen might try to challenge me in court, but I was confident the lease's language was on my side. If they had materially neglected their environmental responsibilities, I could revoke the HOA's rights to manage or even access the lake. Sure enough, the day after I sent the formal letter, Karen went on a social media rampage via the neighborhood's private online forum. She wrote a lengthy post accusing me of trying to destroy the property values, insisting that she'd been working tirelessly to preserve the lake while I was out scheming in the background. She claimed I would fence it off, charge exorbitant fees to use it, and turn the community into a ghost town or some such nonsense. The irony, of course, was that she had planned nearly the same approach, except with her controlling everything. Her tactics escalated further. I received a barrage of brand new violation notices, including one for a small decorative wind chime on my porch. Another alleged that my gutters weren't the right shade of white. It was borderline comical, but I knew each violation carried potential legal weight. I simply collected them in a folder marked Karen's harassment. Some of my more timid neighbors began to feel uneasy, concerned that if I battled Karen too openly, the entire neighborhood might suffer. But a surprising number of them supported me. They'd endured her petty tyranny for years. At least half a dozen came up to me in private to say, "Please, hold your ground. We don't want to live under her oppression anymore." When the official results of the water analysis arrived, my consultant confirmed that the HOA had indeed violated multiple clauses in their lease agreement regarding pollution control. That was the last piece of the puzzle I needed. I called a meeting at my house for Saturday afternoon and invited every resident except Karen and her clique. My living room was packed. People stood in the hallway and kitchen, eager to hear what I had to say. I laid out the findings: environmental negligence, misappropriation of HOA funds based on documents Dorothy had unearthed, and Karen's pattern of harassment. Then I dropped the bombshell. Last week, I purchased the lake. I'm now preparing to revoke the HOA's management rights, effective immediately, unless they agree to rectify the environmental problems and suspend all fines until further notice. Gasps rippled through the room. Some folks started smiling, others looked worried. "Are we still going to have access?" Maria asked. I nodded. "Absolutely. My plan is to transfer the lake into a community trust in the near future, so we can all use it fairly, but first we need to address the toxic leadership that's been abusing the system. If the HOA remains under Karen's rule, we'll never see real change. The lease is in default, which means I can close the lake to all HOA-sponsored events until they comply." People began talking excitedly. Several asked how they could help. Dorothy suggested forming a neighborhood committee to audit the HOA's finances. Hal offered legal guidance, free of charge. Addison volunteered to gather testimonies from every resident who felt they'd been harassed or unfairly fined. That evening, we learned Karen was organizing a flashy lakeside party for Sunday afternoon. It was rumored to be a show of force, a means to demonstrate that she was still in control. I took that as the perfect opportunity to reveal the new reality. So I filed an official notice with the local police department explaining that I was the rightful owner of the lake and that the HOA's lease was terminated due to breach of contract. I requested an officer be present as a courtesy to keep the peace. Sunday arrived. The weather was unseasonably warm for that time of year, ideal for an outdoor gathering. Karen had arranged a lavish setup with catered food, a live band, and plenty of seating near the waterfront. By midday, about 60 people were mingling around, sipping drinks and presumably celebrating their presumed victory. Karen wore a bright teal blouse and designer sunglasses. From afar, she looked every bit the queen of Brookside Estates. I walked onto the grass by the water, my heart pounding. Behind me trailed a police officer and Hal. Dorothy hovered nearby, ready to record everything on her phone, just in case. Karen noticed us and hurried over, trying to block my path. "This is a private HOA function, Mr. Crowley. You're not welcome," she said, her lips curling in disdain. I calmly held out my termination notice. "As of this morning, your lease to manage or access this lake is revoked. You and your event are trespassing on private property I own." Her eyes blazed. You have no right. The HOA is in breach of contract, I cut in, keeping my tone composed. I have documented evidence of environmental neglect, and we have plenty of testimonies that you misused your authority for personal gain. I'm well within my rights to reclaim the property. The police officer here has been made aware of the legal situation. You and your guests have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before we file trespassing charges. Karen's face turned crimson. For a split second, she looked like she might physically lash out. But she saw the cop standing by with an unreadable expression, and she must have realized how bad that would look. She tried a different tactic, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Neighbors, this man wants to take away our community lake and charge you money to use it. He's the real villain here, forcing out families, and several people in the crowd exchanged confused glances. Some of them had already heard my side of the story, so they shook their heads or started stepping away from Karen. Dorothy, filming everything, let out a quiet chuckle. Hal cleared his throat and addressed the onlookers. I'm a retired attorney. I've reviewed the documents. Karen is no longer permitted to host any events on this lake. If anyone stays, it's at their own legal risk. A wave of uncertainty passed over the gathering. People began muttering. A few started picking up their belongings. Karen glared at me with undisguised hatred. You won't get away with this, she hissed, stepping closer so only I could hear. I merely looked at her, unwavering. You've been getting away with your behavior for years. That ends today. Over the next several minutes, the crowd dispersed. Karen tried to corral some of her staunch supporters to remain, but they balked at the potential legal trouble. Within 15 minutes, the entire area was cleared. The band packed up their instruments. The caterers quickly loaded their vehicles. Karen lingered until the last second, then gave me a withering stare before stalking off in her heels. As soon as they were gone, I exhaled in relief. The police officer nodded respectfully and left, satisfied that the situation hadn't escalated into violence. I stood by the water's edge, taking in the view. It was a serene lake, reflecting the pale blue sky, ringed by lush trees. Hard to believe all this drama swirled around such a tranquil place. Hal patted me on the back. Well done, he said quietly. You turned the tables on her in the best possible way. In following weeks, the fallout was significant. Karen attempted to sue me and the developer for interfering with her expected purchase, but her case had no merit. She tried to rile up her network of cronies, but more and more residents came to realize how she'd manipulated them for personal gain. A thorough audit of the HOA's finances began, uncovering questionable expenditures and potential embezzlement. Meanwhile, I made good on my promise to set up a community trust. I invited every homeowner to join a new, transparent board that would oversee the lake's management. The only stipulation was that Karen and her immediate loyalists had to step down from any leadership roles. Some demanded that Karen resign outright, and under pressure, she did. She retreated from her position, her reputation in tatters. The local politician who once backed her abruptly distanced himself, claiming ignorance of her behind-the-scenes scheming. I spent the next month working with environmental experts to clean up fertilizer runoff, implementing better guidelines for lawn treatments to reduce pollution. We posted new rules that allowed catch-and-release fishing in designated areas, ensuring the fish population would remain healthy. Through it all, Selena watched with a mixture of awe and curiosity. One evening, she sat with me on the refurbished wooden dock that extended over the water. "Mom would be proud of you," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "You turned something so terrible into something good for everyone, but especially for me." I put an arm around her shoulder. "I hope so, kiddo. I really do. I just want us to have a place where we can remember her without fear, without intimidation." Selena blinked away tears and said softly, "Now we do." It wasn't all sunshine and roses, of course. Some of Karen's old allies grumbled that I had seized control of the lake, that I was wielding my power in a similar fashion, but I made a point of involving as many residents as possible in decision-making, holding open meetings, documenting expenses, ensuring that no single individual could dominate the process again. Over time, the bitterness died down. People started enjoying the lake again. Families picnicking on weekends, kids learning to fish, older folks taking morning walks around the shoreline. One Saturday, I got a phone call from a man who introduced himself as a journalist from a local paper. He wanted to write a feature about the new, reformed HOA in Brookside Estates, highlighting how a community overcame corruption. I accepted, but on the condition that he also speak to folks like Maria, Dorothy, and Hal, residents who had fought bravely in their own ways against Karen's overreach. They deserved as much recognition as anyone. The journalist was thrilled, and that's how we ended up with a front-page human interest story describing the positive transformations in our neighborhood. Karen, by contrast, tried to slip back into local real estate under a different LLC name, but her reputation was shot. Word spread that she had been investigated for misappropriating funds. Even though the final verdict hadn't been reached, most clients and colleagues didn't trust her. Last I heard, she was attempting to sell her own house in Brookside, which had ironically dropped in value because no one wanted to live in the home of a widely disliked HOA tyrant. Throughout that period, I reflected often on how things could have gone differently. The idea of buying the lake and banning the entire neighborhood had, at first glance, sounded extreme. A sensational reaction that might paint me as vindictive, but I never truly intended to deprive anyone of the lake except those who refused to cooperate in healing the environment and the community. In the end, by shining a bright light on Karen's corruption, I forced a recalibration of the local power structure. When we look out over the water these days, Selena and I see glimmers of the future we wanted. Somewhere Rachel would have felt at peace, a place where neighbors greet each other not with suspicion, but with warmth. We hold annual lake cleanup days now with kids and grown-ups volunteering to pick up litter, test the water quality, plant native grasses along the shore to prevent erosion. Through it all, I can't help but marvel at how much conflict and chaos can revolve around a simple body of water. Or maybe it's never really simple when human greed and personal grudges come into play. One afternoon, as Selena and I were heading down to the dock, we spotted an older man tying up a canoe. He smiled sheepishly, asking if it was okay to fish from there. I recognized him as a neighbor who'd always kept quiet. Perhaps in the past, he had feared Karen's reprisals. "Of course you can," I said with a laugh. "That's what it's here for." He looked relieved. It was a small moment, but it reminded me of why we did all this in the first place. The new HOA board, which excluded Karen's circle of enablers, held their first official meeting in the community center. It was open to all. No more secret ballots, no more hush-hush amendments. Hal presided as an impartial observer, advising them on best practices. Dorothy proposed a series of reforms ensuring that any major rule changes, like banning fishing or building new structures, would require a supermajority vote from the general membership. Maria pushed for a family-friendly zone on one side of the lake so kids could splash around without disturbing more serious anglers. Addison volunteered to organize monthly socials to keep neighbors connected and foster a spirit of cooperation. As for me, I declined an official position on the board. I felt my role had been sufficiently disruptive. I'd done what needed to be done. Now, I just wanted to enjoy the place I fought for, spending time with Selena, maybe hosting a small barbecue every once in a while. If the new board ever needed my financial know-how or my legal strategy mind, I told them, I would be happy to consult, but I had no interest in being the next Karen lording over others. It was never the goal. Sometimes at night, when the moonlight shimmers across the lake's surface, I walk down to the dock alone. I think of Rachel. I imagine her sitting there beside me, enjoying the stillness of the water. I recall her last wish, that Selena grow up happy with hope for the future. I remind myself that it took a $500 fine, a burst of righteous anger, and a whole lot of legal maneuvering to preserve something precious for us all. It's funny how life leads us to unexpected crusades. When neighbors see me, they often wave or stop to chat. Some ask if I'm relieved that the drama is over. Part of me is still processing it all, the sudden shift from outsider to lake owner to community guardian. But as the weeks turn into months and the tension continues to ease, I realize how proud I am of the changes we've collectively made. This was never just about me or Karen. It was about right versus wrong, compassion versus greed, community versus tyranny. In the end, we named the lake Rachel's Haven. The new board voted unanimously to adopt the name as a tribute to my late wife and as a symbol of tranquility restored. A modest wooden sign stands near the main entrance, painted with soft blues and greens, Rachel's Haven, a community sanctuary. Every time I pass it, my heart swells with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. I think about how fleeting life can be, about how some battles choose us rather than the other way around. And so, that is how this entire saga began, with an HOA fine for a simple father-daughter fishing trip, followed by an indomitable Karen trying to rule with an iron fist, but culminating in a story of transformation. If you told me a year ago that I'd end up owning a lake to protect our right to cast a line in the water, I would have laughed at the absurdity. Yet here I am, living proof that sometimes you have to fight fire with a well-planned, resourceful strategy. You have to understand the system and use it for good lest it be used against you. Selena and I still fish regularly now, right off that same dock. We release our catches, watch them dart away, and share quiet moments remembering Rachel. Life isn't perfect. The wounds from Karen's reign run deep for some families who were pressured into selling their homes, but the new board is actively reaching out to everyone, hoping to mend relationships and create a community spirit that was lacking before. Occasionally, word trickles back that Karen is telling anyone who will listen how she was unfairly targeted and run out of her own neighborhood. But the truth stands firm in the records, in the piles of violation notices, in the personal accounts of children who were banned from the pool or tennis courts for no good reason. Her manipulative ways simply weren't sustainable once enough people spoke up. I do wonder if she ever regrets pushing me so hard in the first place. If she hadn't tried to fine me for fishing that day, perhaps she could have quietly acquired the lake. She might have built her dream project on the shore, reaping profits while continuing to intimidate homeowners. But bullies often create their own downfall by pushing the wrong individual. In this case, that individual happened to be a grieving widower who refused to let his daughter's last connection to her mother be destroyed by petty rules and greed. Sometimes that's all it takes, a father determined to protect a precious memory, a community ready to rally against injustice, a little creativity with real estate contracts, and a dash of courage to do what most people only wish they could. So I tell my neighbors whenever they thank me, don't thank just me. It took all of us seeing the truth, all of us deciding that the old way was no longer acceptable. I watch as children squeal with excitement when they catch their first fish. I see older couples strolling at dusk, feeding ducks along the shoreline. That is the essence of a healthy community. Shared spaces, mutual respect, a willingness to collaborate for the common good. And if any future HOA board tries to destroy that fragile balance, I suspect they'll discover that we, the residents, have learned a valuable lesson. We won't be bullied, and we won't be silent. I sometimes reflect on the final conversation I had with Karen, a bitter exchange when she raged that I'd stolen her chance at owning the lake. She insisted she would fight me until the end, that she'd show the world how I was just another tyrant. But time has a way of revealing the true nature of events. My only regret is the heartbreak and stress my daughter experienced during the ordeal. If I could spare Selena the tears, I would. Yet I also believe she grew stronger, learning how to stand up for herself and for what's right. In the end, I understand Karen's motivations a bit better than I used to. She wasn't a one-dimensional villain. She probably rationalized her actions as necessary steps to maintain an upscale environment. She likely convinced herself that anyone resisting her was a threat to her vision. Perhaps it started with good intentions, then turned into a thirst for control. Power is like that sometimes. It corrupts slowly, and by the time you see what it's done, it's too late to reverse course without losing everything. But I won't excuse the harm she caused. Sometimes an eviction of toxic leadership is the only cure. With the combined efforts of brave neighbors, an informed community, and a little legal acumen, we replaced oppression with accountability. Now, the rules that govern Brookside Estates are crafted by a rotating council of homeowners, with each new proposal needing transparent discussion and wide support. No more rubber stamping, no more middle-of-the-night amendments. As for me, I've found a sense of peace. I haven't returned to my old life in venture capital. I've taken a break, focusing instead on personal projects and philanthropic endeavors. In honor of Rachel, I founded a small scholarship fund for local kids who love nature or aspire to environmental studies. It's my way of honoring the memory of the woman who adored tranquil waters and gentle breezes. Selena, now 15, helps me organize charity fishing tournaments, of all things. We teach families the importance of conservation, ensuring that Rachel's Haven remains a sanctuary for everyone. That $500 fine still sits framed in my study as a strange trophy, a reminder that sometimes adversity unlocks the door to unexpected possibilities. If Karen had never thrown that violation at me, we might not have discovered the underlying corruption. We might not have mobilized the neighbors to stand up for their rights, and we definitely wouldn't have reclaimed the lake for honest and sustainable enjoyment. So in a bizarre twist, I owe Karen a certain gratitude. She ignited the spark that helped me defend what mattered most. Yet the moral of this story is also a warning. Never underestimate the power of a determined individual, especially one who understands the system, loves his family, and refuses to be bullied, because once that individual decides to fight, no conjured rule or sneaky maneuver will stop him from doing what's right. Selena and I continue to fish, side by side, rods in hand, hearts at ease. We talk about Rachel, about old times and future dreams. The sun's reflection shimmers across the gentle waves, and every cast of the line feels like a thread connecting us to the past, pulling that love forward into the present. Whenever I think about how close we came to losing this lake to someone else's greed, I feel an unspoken gratitude that we stood our ground. Sometimes neighbors pass by, waving or calling out a cheerful greeting, and in those moments, I understand that we've preserved not just a lake but a sense of belonging. This isn't just water and land, it's part of who we are now. Brookside Estates is no longer defined by petty fines and fear, it's defined by the bond we've forged through adversity, by the shared purpose that rose up when everything was threatened. And if anyone asks how it all started, I simply say, HOA Karen fined me for fishing, so I bought the lake and banned the entire neighborhood. It's a sensational headline, sure, but the real story is about the triumph of common sense over tyranny, of unity over division, and of love over loss. Selena nods in agreement, a proud glimmer in her eyes, as though she too understands the deeper lesson hidden in all that drama. Because, at the end of the day, sometimes we have to create the justice we seek. We have to fight for the places and the memories that are ours to protect. That's exactly what we did here, and I'd do it all again. In a heartbeat. For my daughter, for the spirit of my wife, and for a community that deserved better.